John, it's so great to have you here. You've spent a lot of time in Russia. You talked to Vladimir Putin yourself. If you're a company operating in the UK right now, what do you think?
I think if I'm a Russian company, I'm just a little bit concerned because this will be the beginning, I think, of something that will spread. It's interesting that Nikki Haley has already, by Trump standards, been really very tough on Russia, talking about Syrian children being killed by these nerve agents, as well as the fact that this is actually the first use of a nerve agent against a NATO partner. And there's enough sort of momentum, I think, behind this for it to go a little bit further. And in terms of Russian businesses in London, it's not so much the big exporters. It tends to be much more a home for oligarchs, for people to be able to come send their children to good schools, to keep their money outside Russia. And it's always been a sort of refuge, London, actually, for many, many years, going all the way back to Karl Marx. But it's particularly, in this particular case, it's there because people who are both friends and foes of Putin in Russia have been able to live there fairly easily. But if this changes, I think that does make a difference. The tendency of these things is always to say, look, you expel some diplomats in a few minutes, a few hours, Russia will do the same back, and that's it. But I think this one has a momentum to go a bit further.
Well, John, you put your finger on a key issue here. No one country, no matter how strong, can make Putin come to his knees. We've proved that time and time again. What are the chances of true multilateral action?
Well, it depends a lot on America, to be basic. I mean, Nikki Haley has gone much further than you would expect from the Trump administration, or historically. And I think you will see more people coming in because this is something different. This is using a banned substance, so it breaks all the normal rules about chemical weapons and so on. But against a NATO member, this guy was a British citizen, and I think that does make a difference. So there is just purely in the procedures of what follows, there will now be many more questions to Russia about what exactly is it doing with its stockpiles of chemical weapons, which it hasn't fully reported. And that sort of thing can spread. It does not mean, that things are going to get wildly out of hand, but you have to expect that in this particular case, it could roll further. You see Macron being tougher, you see Germany being tougher.
Well, about Germany, though, Angela Merkel has not condemned it. She said there has to be more transparency. Does that bother you at all?
I think it would do from the British point of view, yes. Because I think that's Merkel, you only have to look at the pictures on the internet of Vladimir Putin, Merkel and the dog, where Merkel and Putin have a very testy relationship. So in that particular case, it's because she supposedly confessed that she was frightened of dogs, and then immediately one showed up at their next meeting, much, it would appear, to Putin's amusement. But that sort of, normally Merkel is the person who is best at dealing with Putin and getting him to change his mind. And in this particular case, if she doesn't come along with it, that would make a difference, yes.
We also want to bring in Victor Sabo. He's Aberdeen Asset Management Portfolio Manager from London. He also oversees $15 billion in emerging market debt at Aberdeen. Great to see you, Victor. So if you take a look at, say, market reaction, for example, yesterday, it was a stronger dollar, weaker ruble. It was a sell-off in Russian equities. Does this change an investment strategy for you at all?
Good morning. No, the market reaction has been muted. I mean, if you look at what's happening now, the markets are recovering. We haven't seen any reaction on the bond market, and that is probably not surprising because Russia continues to be a fundamentally strong investment case. That's why the market was ready to overlook.
And I should point out, it was really interesting because Gazprom actually sold some debt today, and you did see some UK investors in the market buying. You would think that's like the one card the UK could actually play was their natural gas imports, but like you said, continued strength in investment.
Yes, and furthermore, Russia has just announced that it will come to the market with an 11-year sovereign bond and will retap the 30-year bond. And I expect a decent demand for both.
The real Achilles heel of it, conceivably, could be the SWIFT banking system. That would be something that would do a great deal of damage to Russia if somebody focused on that particular aspect.
And that has been raised, but a spokesperson for SWIFT came out overnight, basically, and said, oh, no, we're not doing anything about that unless all 28 countries of the EU, 28 for the moment, get together and tell us to do that. So the chances of really interfering with the business are pretty remote.
It's sort of, I would argue, it's pretty much how I argued at the beginning. This will be bigger than previous retaliations, in a sense, because Russia has crossed several red lines it didn't do before, and because particularly on the issue of chemical weapons, this time there is something different for people to focus on, and it brings together a lot of people who are worried about Vladimir Putin. It does not just bring together the normal kind of Putin bashers. It also brings together people who are worried about what's happening in Syria, the use of those weapons there, and so on and so on.
John, is there a danger in the failure of economic sanctions? I mean, the UK by itself is not big enough. We had multilateral UK sanctions after the shooting down of that civilian airliner over Ukraine. Didn't seem to have much effect at all. If you run out of economic sanctions, it leaves something much more dangerous, potentially.
Well, the Russian economy, if you look at it, for all the reasons that we've made clear, is that it relies on things like oil, natural gas. These are very fungible, i.e. you can get it from everywhere. They're quite difficult, as we've discovered with Iran as well, to keep them away. The real sort of sanctions which seem to hurt Putin and the people around him are the personal ones towards people located on that. On that, London is not entirely without weapons because it is the home of so many of them.
But I am curious onto the company point as well, because even earlier this month, ExxonMobil is leaving their Russian oil venture because they're worried about U.S. sanctions. And I wonder if this sort of catapults that conversation more to the multinationals' minds as well. And that would have a significant, I mean, Exxon not being able to develop the Arctic is significant.
Basically, the sanctions come in two different flavors. There are sanctions where people feel comfortable dancing right up to the edge of it. And there are other ones, the Iran sanctions are the obvious example, where all companies are extremely nervous about doing anything that gets them too close to it. And the Russian ones have so far been a little bit in the first category. There have been individuals named and people have had difficulty dealing with them, but there hasn't been that much actual activity. The Iranian ones, by contrast, everybody deals a lot further away from where the sanction sits because they're terrified of being hit with fines.
To what extent has Vladimir Putin essentially insulated himself? Because he has not done what a lot of people expect him to do, take the money off of oil and other things and invest it in a more developed sort of manufacturing, other sort of economy, technical economy. And in fact, he's remained largely a natural resource dependent economy. That is more immune to international sanctions.
Yes, that's a good point. On the other hand, it's an economy that doesn't grow quickly enough as a result. And many Russians, or the vast amount of Russians, do not take a great share in the proceeds of that economy. A natural resource economy tends to go straight to the small number of people who own all those natural resources. A much broader industrial-based economy would provide more money for many more people. But that being said, Putin is about to win an election.
So, John, to go back to Alix's point, you've interviewed Vladimir Putin. You've studied Russia for a long time. Most experts say it's very unlikely that this nerve agent attack could have been done without Vladimir Putin knowing about it. If that's right, what was he thinking?
I think sometimes with people like Putin, it's less actually what he himself thinks than what other people around him think that he wants. It's a bit like the famous thing many years ago in English history where Henry II, Thomas à Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was killed because he shouted, "Let someone get rid of this turbulent priest." You can just imagine Putin moaning about the number of Russian spies who live now safely on the other side of what was the Cold War, and somebody thinking that was an executive command to proceed in that direction.
And just to sort of wrap it up here, you know, the question being, do investors actually care? Because you're looking at GDP, at least in the third quarter of Russia, 5.8%, slowing sequentially, but nonetheless a solid number. The MISEX is up by about almost 9% so far this year. So there is also a distinction when you're looking at these headlines as a market participant of, okay, worthy to know, but do I care?
That is where, as I said, that's where the sanctions, there's a level of sanctions where it really does begin to matter, where it makes a really visible amount of difference to what happens to the economy. So far with Russia, partly for the reasons that David pointed out, it's a very natural resource base, very based around these commodities that you can get from anywhere, so they're very difficult to sanction. So far it hasn't really hit, and Putin is doing well in the polls at home.